Now, there are some lessons that are easier to preach than others. And when you're about to take a very deep dive into one of your own personal failures, it's not a very easy sermon to preach. I don't think I've ever done a lesson just on jealousy. In the 15 years I've been preaching, I don't think I've ever gone out of my way to just look exclusively at jealousy. The reason being, if you hadn't noticed, that is one of my own personal failures. I do get jealous sometimes. Envious, covetous. Those are a lot of different words that you can apply to the same sin. Now, Scripture isn't shy when it comes to the dangers of any extreme emotion, whether it be jealousy or anything else. The Bible warns us about the dangers of anger or a bad temper in Proverbs 15 or in Proverbs 22. It warns us here of in Galatians 5 verse 20 or in Colossians 3 or Matthew 5 verse 22 of all the dangers of what would happen if you were an extremely passionate person, angry to the point of that anger manifesting itself in sinful and unrighteous ways. The Bible encourages us to seek tranquility and not passion. One great verse is in Proverbs 14 and verse 30. Notice that one here. As the writer of Proverbs puts it, in Proverbs 14, verse 30, a tranquil heart is life to the body, but passion is rottenness to the bones. Other translations do say envy or jealousy is rottenness to the bones. 1 Timothy 2 and verse 2 in the New Testament, notice the way that the apostle puts it here in 1 Timothy 2, verse 2. Pray for kings and all who are in authority, in order that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. So these kinds of extreme emotions would include repenting of and avoiding temper tantrums, pouting, unbridled rage, mockery, hurtful sarcasm, blind patriotism or fanaticism of anything, or immoral eroticism. But more dangerous than all of these other emotions is jealousy. Proverbs puts it very well in Proverbs 27 verse 4 when it says, wrath is fierce and anger is a flood. Those things are bad enough, right? Wrath is fierce and anger is a flood. And you could stop the verse there and it would be a very true statement. But who can stand before jealousy? If wrath is that bad, and anger is so dangerous, you better watch out for jealousy. In an article from desiringgod.com, one article, Paul Maxwell had this to say on jealousy, and I think he describes jealousy very, very well. Leading off right from Proverbs 27, verse 4, the writer says, jealousy is tyrannical. It is catastrophic. It's metaphysical. It feels controlling and you cannot escape it. It feels as if every particle of self-control you have in your entire being is vaporized in one fell emotional swoop. It brings people to the end of themselves in a millisecond and they are no longer the same people. Bodily, it makes you feel like you've been infected with the rage virus. Radioactive, indestructible, decomposing, inciting strong aversion to any human interaction that does not meet your singular end. Or as Proverbs 6 verse 34 puts it, jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. Solomon said this in a statement in the Song of Solomon, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, if you're not familiar with that one. In Song of Solomon chapter 8, notice what he says here beginning in verse 5 for context's sake. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Beneath the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she was in labor and gave you birth. Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death, but jealousy is as severe as the grave. The flashes are flashes of fire. the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. And that is what jealousy brings us to. Colossians chapter 3 says it's tantamount to idolatry even. Along with a number of other sins there in Colossians 3 verse 5, envy and greed or covetousness are included there. It's basically idolatry. When you love something so much, when you desire something so much, you would pursue something to such an extreme degree that it even takes over your will to follow God. Yes, it's tantamount to idolatry. But hold on a second there, Ryan. Aren't there a couple verses in the Bible that say God is jealous? I'm a jealous God, or God jealously desires us. Isn't God jealous? Doesn't that make it okay for us to be jealous, or at least jealous in some form? Well, maybe you're partially right. A lot of times we either dismiss our jealousy as just mere insecurity of, I don't worry about jealousy. It's just insecurity. I'll get over it. It's not a big deal. Or we try to justify our jealousy by pointing out that God admits to His own jealousy. And it is true that God gets jealous, so much so that He once introduced Himself by the title of jealous. In Exodus 34, verse 14, He said, "My name is jealous." Think about that. Where God is speaking to the sons of Israel in the wilderness, and He says, "My name is jealous." All within the context, of course, of the Israelites possibly seeking after the gods of the Canaanites. And God warns them, don't you follow after those other gods. Don't follow the ways of the Canaanites, because there's a reason why I'm having you drive them out before you. I am a jealous God. My name is jealous. And He doesn't hide the fact that He's jealous over Israel. He doesn't hide the fact that it upsets Him when He sees their unremitting spiritual adultery. It's pointed out in several other passages. We don't have to look at all of them, but in Deuteronomy 4, verse 24, I'm a jealous God. Chapter 32, verse 21, I have a jealousy toward you. Zechariah 8, verse 2. Hosea chapter 3 and 4, which we'll look at in just a moment. And of course in James chapter 4, verse 5, that God has a jealous desire for us. So we might say, in trying to justify our own jealous behavior and attitudes, if God can be jealous, then so can I, because clearly it's a divine emotion. Okay. You might make that argument. And it is, in fact, a divine emotion. But I wonder, if you were a carpenter for a living and you had a 5-year-old child, would you let your 5-year-old child just use the table saw at will? Right? Now, as a carpenter, are you able to handle that table saw? And maybe when your child gets older and more responsible, can he or she handle the table saw in small doses, perhaps? You know, just because we see God doing something doesn't mean that we can necessarily mimic every aspect of it or every manifestation of it. Jealousy is a dangerous ingredient to be handled only by someone with incredible self-control and no insecurity. That's the difference, isn't it? That's the difference between God's jealousy and our jealousy. God is never insecure, and when He does display jealousy, it's always a manifestation of pure, perfect, holy, divine love. God is not jealous of Israel because of an insecurity. He doesn't look at Israel following after Molech and Baal and Dagon and start biting his fingernails like, oh, what does Dagon have that I don't? A fish head, that's what Dagon had. He had a fish head. Well, why do they love Baal so much? Haven't I been nice to them and Baal hasn't been? I mean, God is not up there biting His fingernails in heaven because Israel was seeking after Baal and Dagon and the other gods of the Canaanites. It does not come from a place of insecurity. God is totally secure. He is perfect and pure and holy. So when He's jealous for a reason. And it's not because He feels like He's too small, or that He's not good enough, or that He's not handsome enough, or that He's not perfect enough. We, on the other hand, cannot make that same claim. And I might be as bold as to say, all human jealousy stems from a place of insecurity. Now, you probably can come up with some situation where you say, well, not in that case, or here's an exception over here, or I can handle my jealousy. All right, that's fine. If you say you can be jealous and not sin, I'm not going to try to argue with you. I'm just saying, jealousy is a dangerous enough emotion that I think we ought to leave it up to God to be jealous. In the same way that He talks about wrath or revenge in Romans chapter 12, leave room for the wrath of God. Never take your own revenge on anybody. Why? Because we're just not very good at revenge. Plain and simple. We're not very good at it. So you might say, well, wrath is a divine emotion. Revenge is a divine action. So why can't I take my own revenge? Because God warns us about it. You're not very good at it. Don't take your own revenge because you're not very good at it. And stop being jealous because we're not very good at it either. We become jealous because we're insecure about things. And the writer of this article from desiringgod.com had this to say here. Of course, both divine and human jealousy contain a form of exclusivity, vulnerability, and the possibility of deep pain and betrayal. And yet, human jealousy is unique in that it contains insecurity, because humans are not secure intimate relationships. And so true human jealousy is always insecure, because insecurity is part of our being finite. It is in how we respond, first of all, to our inherent inevitable insecurity that determines how we handle our jealousy when it does arise. Let's take a good human example that God uses to show a little bit of His own jealousy. In the book of Hosea, in the Old Testament, we don't have time to read all of it, but in the book of Hosea, let me set up the story for you. There's a prophet named Hosea, as we find out here in chapter 1, and God gives him a very strange command. Very strange command indeed. He says, Hosea, I want you to go find yourself a wife. She's not going to be an old regular wife. She's going to be a wife of harlotry. Yes, you read that right in Hosea chapter 1. He says, find yourself a wife of harlotry. Find a prostitute and marry her. Now, that's not any knock against Hosea, all right? Hosea, man of fidelity, truth, honesty. And he loves this woman also. He marries a prostitute and loves her. Not only does he love her, but he makes a family with her. They have children together. And of course, each of the names of the children, God commands him to give them certain names that have a meaning behind them. And that's all part of the story of Hosea. But you find out later on in chapter 2 that the woman, Gomer, great name by the way, who wouldn't fall in love with a woman named Gomer, right? But you find out that the woman, Gomer, has gone back to her life of prostitution. She's abandoned her husband, Hosea, who loves her very much, and who they have a family together, and she goes back to a life of prostitution. And now, I think a lot of men, their natural response would be, wash your hands of that whole thing and walk away. Fine. You like all the lifestyle, you like the gifts you were getting, you liked all the dainty food you were eating, you liked all the luxuries that came along with the life of prostitution. You liked that. Within that context, you liked that. Fine, I wash my hands and walk away. And yet you get to chapter 3, and this is what God tells Hosea to do. Go again and love a woman who is loved by her husband, yet an adulteress. Even as the Lord loves the sons of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love the raisin cakes. Go again and love a woman who is loved by her husband. I think what we get is this glimpse into divine love. Now it's manifested in Hosea and Gomer, a human relationship. It's a human husband and wife. But God sets up this whole story in Hosea to prove a point. In the same way that Hosea loved his wife and felt a justified jealousy over her when she went back to a life of prostitution. And I don't know any righteous, good, honest, loving husband who wouldn't feel jealousy toward a wife who fell into that kind of life. He felt this justified jealousy, and God says, your response is this. When you feel that jealousy over Gomer, you go get her from that life. You take her away from that life, and you go and love a woman who is loved by her husband. And all of that is to prove the point about God's love for His own people. That in spite of all the spiritual adultery that Israel has committed, God says, I still love them the way that Hosea loves Gomer. I love them the way a husband loves his wife no matter what, through thick and thin, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do we part. I love my people, God says. But He has a jealousy toward them. A justified jealousy toward them. So we learn a few things from divine jealousy then. First of all, that it is not inherently sinful to be jealous. And I know I just got done saying, let's not be jealous just because God is. But we have to acknowledge it is not inherently sinful to be jealous. It is God's own reasonable, emotional response to betrayal. It's not inherently sinful to be jealous. Second, like Hosea, my own painful experiences can teach me a lot about God. When I am betrayed by somebody, when I have a jealousy toward another person, when I'm struggling in some way with these trials, that can actually give me a glimpse into how God feels. If I'm jealous over another human being, imagine how God must feel when we fail to live up to His standard, when we fail to obey His will, when we have spiritually obeyed God. Gives us something to think about then, doesn't it? Of course, His emotions are always morally pure and incomprehensibly more intense, but as Deuteronomy 32 puts it, they are communicable emotions. God says, I'm jealous over you there in Deuteronomy 32. I'm jealous over you. But if you're unfaithful to me, if you follow after the gods of the Canaanites, I'm going to make you jealous over another nation. You'll feel jealousy, but it won't be a justified, divine, pure jealousy like mine. And third, jealousy can be very revealing. I think this is an important point to make, by the way. When all the distractions and the details of life are kind of burned away by jealousy, right? When the dross is sort of removed, and jealousy will do that. Jealousy burns like a fire in your life. It becomes all-consuming, so it's the only thing you think about. But when jealousy does burn away all of the other distractions, what's left behind is deep desire. And you find out how much you really wanted something. It's almost like that job that you interviewed for, or that thing that you really wanted, or whatever it ends up being. When you don't get that, it almost reveals, wow, I guess I really did want that, didn't I? Now, it doesn't always manifest itself in the right way. It doesn't always manifest itself as a righteous thing, so that's not what I'm saying, but at least what jealousy does is it clarifies for you the intensity of a desire that you have for something or someone. And that, at the very least, can be very clarifying. So that if you're struggling with something, at least you know now. You know what to do. You know what to deal with. With all that being said, though, why is jealousy not to be trifled with or dismissed easily? Because even though it is a divine emotion, and we see examples of divine jealousy for man and God's people, we can't be casual with it. Like the table saw in your garage. Like chemicals that you keep for whatever this or that. You cannot play with those things. You cannot play with jealousy. I'll give you 4 things to think about. 4 reasons why jealousy is a thing not to be trifled with. First, because jealousy robs us of the satisfaction that's found in our own accomplishments. It is very true when it is said that comparison robs us of all joy. When you look at your own life and compare it to somebody else's, when you look at your own accomplishments but compare them to somebody else's, your own house compared to another person's house, your own car compared to another person's car, your own spouse or your kids, your family compared to somebody else's, it will rob you of all the joy that comes with those blessings in your life. It will rob you of it, totally. Go to Ecclesiastes 4, verse 4. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, one of my favorite books of the Bible here. In Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 4 it says, "And I have seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after the wind." Now, whatever that might say about capitalism, I'll leave that up to you. But I think that Solomon is trying to tell us that when you spend your entire life just trying to one-up everybody else around you, trying to keep up with the Joneses, so-and-so got a new car, so I've got to get a new car. So-and-so lost this much weight, so I've got to lose this much weight. So-and-so made partner, so I've got to make partner. So-and-so makes this much money in 6 figures, and I've got to make that much money in 6 figures. When you spend your entire life comparing yourself to somebody else, Solomon says that is vanity and striving after the wind. I have looked at the ways of man and seen that everything and every labor and every skill is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. Now, of course, there's a place for a little healthy rivalry. There's a place for feeling motivated. Of course, there's a place for looking at successful people and striving to be successful as well. But when that starts manifesting itself as coveting their things and being envious of their position and being jealous of the things that they have in their success, you've reached a very unhealthy point in your life. And I promise you, just as I think Solomon would, you will never be satisfied. Because there's always somebody richer than you. There's always somebody younger than you. There's always someone healthier than you. Someone faster than you. Someone more successful than you. There will always be somebody else out there that you've got to follow after and chase. And that's a hard, hard life to live. And when you finally do realize that rivalry and jealousy and covetousness as motivators are empty, you will be left feeling empty. Now, to counter that, go to chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes. He says here in chapter 5, verse 18, "Here's what I have seen to be good and fitting to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor." The possessive there, all one's labor. Your own labor, in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. When you can rejoice in your own labor and be thankful to God for the blessings that you have. Not the blessings that somebody else has, but the blessings that you have, you will find that to be a much more rewarding approach to life. But second, don't mess with jealousy, because it is at the heart of our most profound and abiding unrest. Go to James chapter 3. This was our scripture reading earlier in our worship service, but I want to read it again. In James chapter 3, notice here beginning in verse 14. James 3, verse 14. "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, and demonic." Think about that. When you live a life of jealousy and selfish ambition, he's saying that is a demonic life. Verse 16 is the clincher, though. "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there's disorder and every evil thing." When you let jealousy into your life, it opens up the door for everything else. When you let jealousy into your life, it opens up the door for everything else. Where there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there's disorder and every evil thing. He goes on to explain in chapter 4, in fact, some practical application. In verse 1, what is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? As in, what's the source of disorder and every evil thing in your life? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust and you do not have, so you commit murder. All right, so you just open up the door for murder. You're envious and you cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. So when you let jealousy into your life, you are letting the thing in that will bring about all of your most profound and abiding pain. The jealousy that destroys your marriage. The jealousy that ruins your relationship with a brother or sister, spiritual or physical. The jealousy that ruins a relationship between a parent and a child. The jealousy that ruins people who were once best friends. The jealousy that destroys a sports team or a business or a church. Jealousy that will tear an eldership apart. Jealousy that splits a church down the middle. Jealousy that kills a nation. Jealousy, yeah. Many of the most painful experiences known by man in the Bible came about because of jealousy. Eve was jealous of God and His knowledge, and when Satan promised her divine knowledge, if she only ate the fruit, she ate it. Cain was jealous of his brother and his good sacrifice, so he murdered him. Sarah was jealous of Hagar when Hagar was able to bear Abraham a child. She mistreated Hagar and had her banished. Jacob's two wives were jealous of each other. And so they went with a war of babies in one of the most comical and comically sad marriages in all of human history. Joseph and his brothers were jealous because their dad loved him more than them and made him a coat of many colors. Saul was jealous of David because David killed his 10,000s while Solomon only killed his thousands. And even though David was always on Saul's side and loved him like a father, he tried to kill David and had him banished. Don't mess with jealousy because it gives us a false impression of the people and the things that we covet most. Go to Proverbs 24, verse 1. It says in Proverbs 24, verse 1, "Do not be envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them, for their minds devise violence, and their lips talk of trouble." And when you're envious of evil people, sometimes you think evil people have it all together. He goes on to say, notice in Psalm 37, I want to skip over to Psalm 37, a very similar statement here about being envious of the wicked. Look at Psalm 37, verses 1 through 3. He says here, "Do not fret because of evildoers, be not envious toward wrongdoers, for they wither quickly like the grass and fade like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart." And in probably the best passage on this subject in Psalm 73. The first part of the psalm, in Psalm 73, the writer says, "I became envious of wicked people because it seemed like their whole life was all put together." The wicked person was healthy, the wicked person was rich, the wicked person was fat because of all of his blessings and his abundance, and I was envious because nothing bad ever seems to happen to wicked people. But he goes on at the end of the psalm to say, "But if I had thought that, I would have betrayed God and His people. And I would have been stupid like a cow. I didn't understand that with the wicked, they get their pleasures in this life, but they will be disciplined or punished in the end. They never get away with it." So what jealousy does is, jealousy puts a veneer over everything. When you covet something, when you desire something, when you're envious of something, in your mind, you always make it seem prettier, more appealing, more desirable than it actually is. That person at work that got the promotion instead of you, and he got his promotion by sucking up to the boss and by sneaking around people's backs, by saying nasty things about coworkers, by always just being just that guy, his life is not as good as you think it is. His life's not as good as you think it is. The person who wins the mega bucks billionaire whatever lottery, oh, they've got it made now. No, their life is not easy. Not the way you think it is, at least. Not the way you think it is. And it's only too late when we've gone down that path of jealousy that we discover how much we actually loathe ourselves and other people when we've been driven by evil desire. Go to Titus 3, verse 3. This is one of the most striking phrases in the book of Titus, if you ask me. In Titus 3 and verse 3, look what he says here. For we also once were foolish ourselves, disobedient, deceived, enslaved to various lusts and passions, spending our life in malice and jealousy. Spending our lives in malice and jealousy. Hateful, hating one another. Think about that. Before we were Christians, we lived our lives in a way that was envious and jealous and covetous and immoral and evil. And we desired things that were wrong, and we followed after people that we shouldn't. And we were envious of people that have only hell as their final destination. And he says, we were hateful and hating one another. Jealous people hate themselves. Jealous people hate others. I remember that story in 2 Samuel chapter 13. One of David's sons desired his half-sister. And he longed for her so bad he felt sick in his body how much he lusted after her. So he tricked her. He pretended that he was sick and had her come and wait on him hand and foot. And when nobody else was in the room, he grabbed hold of her and he raped her. Raped his half-sister. And did that make him feel better? In fact, in 2 Samuel 13, verses 14 and 15, after he raped her, it says that his response was to kick her out, reject her, because the hatred that he had for her was stronger than the love that he had for her. He hated the thing that he was jealous of, and he hated himself for what that jealousy drove him to do. And finally, don't mess with jealousy, because it robs us of our ministry. We all have a place in God's kingdom, something special that we can do, something that we can contribute. All of us have something that God wants us to do in His kingdom. But if you spend all of your time being jealous of what somebody else is doing in God's kingdom, you miss the job that you have been given to do. Well, I sure wish I had that skill, or I wish I had that opportunity, or wish I could go there or be that. I'm sure jealous of the attention that that person gets or the opportunities that that person has. When you do that, you are robbing yourself of the job that God wants you to be doing. Remember in the book of 1 Corinthians, in chapter 12, Paul talks about the church like a human body. That we're all members of the human body. All of us have a place in God's church. Some of us are a hand, and some are a foot, and some are the eyes, and some are the tongue and the mouth and the ears, and we all have a different place. Now notice what he says here beginning in verse 14. The body's not one member, but many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I'm not a part of the body, it is not for this reason any less a part of the body. Or if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I am not a part of the body. It's not for this reason any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eyeball, where would the hearing be? And if the whole were hearing, well, where would the sense of smell be? But now God has placed the members, each one of them in the body, just as He desired. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? But now there are many members, but one body. He goes on to say that God has appointed in His church people to do many different things, many skills, many talents, many different jobs. And we don't all have the same job. So one leads a song, and another preaches, and another teaches a class. And another is a deacon serving in his area of responsibility. So we take care of material needs or financial needs. Other people are hospitable and they practice their hospitality, and that's their area of service. Other people are encouragers and visitors, and they're the people that you can cry with and laugh with. Other people are there to be your second dad, the person who will take you to the side and give you the hard criticism when you really need it. And maybe that's an area of their service that they're really good at. Needless to say, everybody has a job to do. And if you're the hand always looking down at the foot, or the eye always looking at the ear, or the mouth always looking down at the legs, and you're always saying, I sure wish I could be somebody else. I wish I could do what that person could do. It's jealousy. And you're going to end up accomplishing nothing then. We must strive to be as jealous for God as He is for us. To desire God with all of our heart and all of our strength and all of our mind. He loved us so much that He gave His only begotten Son. And like Romans chapter 8 says, if God is for us, who can be against us? The one who would not spare His own Son for us. Who justified us, who sanctified us, who redeemed us from all of our lawless deeds that we might live for Him forever. Let us have a divine type of jealousy for Him as well, so that nothing gets in the way of that. So the moment that you see yourself going down a path of jealousy, where you love things of this world more than you love God, stop yourself and say, that is an idol, it is jealousy, and I must jealously desire God and not things. Let us desire God with that kind of intensity with which He has desired us. If you have any spiritual need at all this morning, then please let it be known by coming forward as we stand and sing.